Part of what I appreciate about Hitchcock's Under Capricorn is its illustration of the colonial English/Irish settlers and perhaps their distinctions to Australia and their grandiose pathology. To the rich and privileged, a new large exotic place to call their own, a new America in a respect. To others it represents an opportunity to begin anew, a more level playing field of workers and properties compared with England or Ireland at that time. Possibly less considered for a long time due to not being much of a thriller, Under Capricorn resonates now as a shining example of a Hitchcock melodrama, a genre he was not unknown to compose earlier in his filmography, and one of the most admirable in English language cinema at large, celebrated in part now due to Jack Carter's photography and its restoration in the era of high definition. No television broadcast or VHS or DVD would have done this film a proper justice. Its Technicolor is perhaps comparatively to other Hitchcock Hollywood color pictures, subdued yet incredibly refined. In particular, other two long takes, running at more or less 10 minutes each, both reminiscent of how Hitchcock employed them for interior dialogue scenes in the prior feature Rope. Certainly celebrated as an instance of Ingrid Bergman's radiant screen presence, and also of Joseph Cotton. Both are of more iconic or recognized roles in Hitchcock's oeuvre, and yet display extremely distinct, developed performances over two entirely uniquely defined character psychologies. Under Capricorn arguably shines more in execution than as a pre-production script. Though I am unfamiliar with any particular source novel, it is rather easy to imagine this narrative as a developed piece of prose between the same or very similar dialogue, whilst in Hitchcock's enacting of such a script, his cinematographer and his cast are his existential prose. The psychology of a modern Australian is tied to a notion of this nation as a unique, impassioned experiment in a democratic, developed nation of goodwill and enabling freedoms. Inspired by English, American, Canadian, and other Western experiments, it is not attached to an ancient or even centuries-old cultural pride, and is more concerned with creating an idealized distillation of the English parliamentary experiment over a common market, plus a post-war welfare state project, which a greedy plutocrat class threatens to erode here, but this is not an inevitable outcome either, hopefully. The psychology of the settler colonizer, then, at a time long before the existence of the legal body Australia, prior to the internationally acknowledged federation of this nation, is entirely different. It is that of an English or Irish exceptionalist want for more, for stretching out, for starting anew in unique pastures, tied to England yet blithely above it, insisting on cultural observances yet plainly bored of the nation which inspires that loyalty, like a spoilt child envying the neighbour child's fancy remote-controlled robot over his own. Under Capricorn presents these pre-Federation pathologies within a continuum of old-world high society proper aristocratic window dressings, ornate blinds masking the view into a psychologically insecure, dormant/repressed volcano. I'm not sure if Hitchcock's narrative dispels any revelations of this time and place, beyond employing it as an exercise in melodrama, but then maybe that was why the aberrant ruptures, familiar or conducive of the thriller genre's tendencies, were a superior, more effective communication of Hitchcock's psychological fascinations. The plot structure of a thriller allowed Hitchcock to examine the psychological fragility of his subjects more reliably. Potentially, the thriller was a more reminiscent scaffold of a lived modern existence, especially in a more then contemporary or contemporary, scientifically defined world, enabling of paranoias, feelings of hopelessness, and behavioral determinism than the often rote, manicured, and choreographed Hollywood dramas, which are not cited as examples of drama superiority to genre allegories when this is argued, if it is, in the modern day, compared with socialist realist/docu-realist movements in cinema, where this medium is concerned. Within the then available Hollywood paradigms, these sensational thrillers were the greatest arguments for cinema as transmitter of data of consciousness, at least when helmed by Hitchcock. As I've presumably said before, his black and white films can feel like psychological textbook fictional/metaphorical case studies composed to extenuate psychoanalytic extremes and theoretical behavior via extreme hypothetical examples. Even his colour films operate like fever dreams, the likes of Vertigo being compared to classical Greco-Roman dramatic nucleus, the cast of Rear Window existing on a sliding scale between aspirational subject, desirable object, unaspirational subject, and undesirable object. Under Capricorn, then displaying this Hitchcockian psychosocial enthusiasm via melodrama, I find it less effective than the best of the thrillers, though still commendable, and more successfully arguably than the similarly melodramatic, though more approaching the thriller threshold, feature Rebecca, via being less sensational and not employing pseudo-supernatural distractions as superficial visceral, one of Hitchcock's least subtle films, plausibly. Under Capricorn might accomplish more than any Hollywood melodrama, which might mean either I don't care for this mold at all, or that Hitchcock was an unrecognized genius of the form, but both could be totally true. Of course, there is one infamous, perhaps thriller sequence in this film, and it's one of Hitchcock's most bizarre and potentially most memorable, if you allow it to be, I suppose.